People don't understand that when you move power by wired lines, you could lose up to 30% of that power before it actually reaches the consumer. We are using photonics and the management of photonics to move energy, a minimum loss of 5%, which is unheard of in energy transmission. Wireless transmission is all about how you can move power wirelessly on a grid where you're not actually utilizing the core grid, decentralizing power transmission. So therefore, you're able to lower energy costs and put that into the hands of the consumer. There's many ways we can build out this infrastructure. We've got collaborations with a company, they're producing phone cases. We're talking to them about actually producing a phone case so anyone's on our network, it will wirelessly charge their phone.
Welcome to We Are DePIN, a podcast dedicated to the world of DePIN projects. Every episode, we invite amazing DePIN projects to explain how they're revolutionizing and shaping the future of DePIN and Web3. Our goal is to keep you informed about everything happening in the DePIN space. This podcast is brought to you by Minima, the real-world blockchain. Minima is a device-agnostic and fully decentralized Layer 1 blockchain. It has a lightweight architecture that enables a full node to run on any mobile or IoT device, making it exceptionally adaptable for scaling decentralized physical infrastructure networks. Minima's technology is now supported by an expansive and engaged community of over 50,000 node operators. Join us for the next insightful discussion. Calvin, welcome to the We Are DePIN podcast. How are you?
I'm fine. Thanks, Sina. Thanks for inviting us and giving us the opportunity to talk about Aeir.
No, my absolute pleasure. It's so good to have you on. And Aeir was a company I met one of your team members in Paris for the NFT Paris event some time ago in February. And when I heard about what you guys are doing in terms of wireless energy and wireless power, it didn't make sense in my mind. So I really had to dig deeper, and I've been researching you guys ever since. And it sort of felt like the perfect business and the perfect use case of DePIN to bring onto the podcast. So I would love to start off the podcast just as an overview of what Aeir is.
Okay, no problem. Well, my role at Aeir, I'm the head of ecosystem, which basically means I get involved in various parts of the business. And the short answer to your question, we are trying to decentralize the power transmission. If you know anything about how energy works, you've got power generation. And when people talk about getting to net zero, they focus very much on renewable energy, which is on the power generation side. So that could be solar, wind, various other technologies. But the key issue globally is not so much the generation, it's the transmission. It's the fact that globally, even if we look at the UK, we've got serious issues in bringing that energy into the grid. Because these grids were built 100 years ago and they were not designed to take in all of this excess power generation that is being produced via renewables. And you'll probably have noticed, there's issues around grid connection in the US. The transmission lines can get set on fire and cause loads of disruption. And the wireless transmission is all about how you can move power wirelessly, point to multi-point on a grid where you're not actually utilizing the core grid. So therefore, what you're able to do is to bring that power generation into microgrids, which obviously that's our focus on wireless transmission, be able to move that power point to point up to, say, 2 miles. And that's really what the wireless transmission is all about. It's about decentralizing power transmission, which is actually normally owned by a government or a huge organization like national grid and put that into the hands of the consumer. So therefore, you're able to lower their energy costs, and also it's a different market from the centralized transmission.
We're living through, a cost of living crisis, and a big part of that is due to lack of, from a lot of people's opinions, it's the lack of energy, or the cost of energy is fairly high. It's come down ever so slightly in the UK at least, but it's still fairly high. And from what you're saying, it might be less so an availability of energy, but it could be also the transmission of it. Is that correct?
That's correct. The key issue is that most of the energy generation is actually owned by huge organizations. And also the transmission is owned by huge organizations. So when you get your energy bill in any country, it actually has two components. It has a component for the energy generation and then a component for the transmission. Most people don't even look at their energy bills. So they just pay them. They just pay the bill because they don't really have much choice. And with the wireless transmission, to give you an idea of the capabilities, we are able to move. We've simulated this. Our chief scientist has worked at NASA. He's worked on projects that I can't really go into because they're governmental. But we have been able to move 74 kilowatts of power, point to point, point to multi-point, on a NASA-based simulator. And to give you an idea, in the UK, the average usage of energy is around 15 kilowatt hours per day. So therefore, we are able to move power to other individuals as long as they're part of our network, and therefore reducing their energy costs considerably. The technology, if you want me to kind of explain how the technology works, I think maybe now would be a good...
Well, I think let's talk about it a bit later, because I want to also dig deep into how Aeir started in terms of, because we'll talk about the tech like straight afterwards, but I'm keen to learn more around sort of how the business originated, because the concept of wireless energy transmission sounds very new. It sounds very radical. So how did the business start, and what's been the journey so far? And
I can give you an overview of that. So Himesh Patel, the founder, his background was private equity in power. He was getting a little fed up of it because he's dealing with governments and dealing with oil and gas pipelines, and really wanted to kind of move away from doing that type of work. And one of his mentors, she was studying at MIT. She came to him. This is in around 2016, and she said, "Look, I've got a concept for wireless transmission. Will you fund me?" I think Himesh found this to be the ideal opportunity to move away from what he was doing. They built a small team. They had partnerships with IBM. They actually demonstrated at a show in the US, I think in 2017. But the technology at the time was near field, which basically meant they were only able to move power around 10 feet. Applications for mobile phones or small devices, that could work, but Himesh had a bigger view of what he wanted to do with the wireless transmission, but the science wasn't really there. So, and obviously the finance, the financing for what they were trying to do was huge. So he kind of sat on it for a couple of years. He took time out, studied the blockchain, some of these protocols that are coming out, 2018, 2019, extensively researched helium because of how helium was designed with the nodes and transmitting data through the IoT devices. And one of his colleagues, or, you know, in their world, they're very well connected. So someone said to Himish, look, there's a guy I think you need to talk to. He might be able to help you with a wireless transmission. They got talking, exchanged data. This is around 2020, 2021. Who's now our chief scientist, basically said, look, I've cracked this. And Himish was like, what are you talking about? He says, I've come up with a concept where we can move that power up to 200 meters. So they got talking, and Himish was saying, please explain what you're talking about. So to give you an idea, our chief scientist is a dual PhD in mathematics and in physics. He's also a renowned expert on photons. So basically our technology, I've actually moved on to the technology now.
Yeah, no, please do. That was my next question.
Yeah. So that's the journey to where we are right now. But basically we are using photonics and the management of photonics to move energy, point to point, point to multi-point, a minimum loss of 5%, which is unheard of in energy transmission. People don't understand that when you move power by wired lines, you could lose up to 30% of that power before it actually reaches the consumer. 30% of the power is lost through transmission.
So you're telling me if you transfer the energy wirelessly, which I've not seen before, but that just seems insane. But if you do that wirelessly, you're actually saving energy compared to if you use wired infrastructure.
Yeah.
Wow, that is insane.
Yeah. Now, basically, how it works is we have antennas. These are like 3 meters, you know. So anyone who was involved in helium and they had outside antennas, they would kind of know the size of these things. They're not huge. But basically, because we're managing photons, a photon, when it hits a solar panel, becomes an electron. And that's where you actually produce the electricity. But with our technology, we can actually determine if that photon is going to move elsewhere on our grid as a photon or stay where it is as an electron. And with our solar or with our actual antenna, it can actually also be a solar system, because we can wrap materials around the antenna, or we can have a certain amount of solar panels. So now with our network, not only can our network receive power, transmit power, but also generate power through our microgrid outside of what we're doing in terms of power generation with solar systems. And that is a huge game changer, because you're talking about a system that can meet your energy requirements. If you have our antenna as a solar system, you're net zeroing all your energy costs. Plus, you're able to gain incentives by moving that power throughout our network, which makes Aeir a decentralized physical infrastructure network, i.e. DePIN. But that's how the technology works. I probably can't go into too much detail, but I can kind of give you the roadmap of where we are right now. But that is basically how the technology works. We're actually managing photons, and anyone from a physics background will know that photons move at the speed of light. So it's very, very revolutionary. I mean, we've moved away from the Tesla model. There are other technologies out there on the wireless side, but like Emerald, but they use a beam technology and it's point to point. So where, say, for example, you've got, like the issues in the Caribbean with the hurricanes and power lines go down, they can bring this truck in and it will beam a certain amount of power. But our technology is not a beaming technology. It's based on the management of photons.
So just like more practically, so the way the energy infrastructure in the UK, or like I guess around the world, works with the wired technology is you've got sort of energy hubs and where the sort of energy originates from, and then that's your sort of distributed around the country using these power lines, and then they go to households, or they might go to like a local place and they go to households, etc. How does it work with you guys? Is it like, because it's 200 meters, so you must have. Is it individual hubs, or is it people that receive the energy also transmit it? How does it work?
So basically, by having an antenna, you're creating microgrids. And if you think about the helium hexes, where they determined, okay, you can have a distribution of these units every 300 meters. And those that are concentrated into that hex actually earn a lot less. But with I'm going to call it a hex system, we know exactly where the antennas need to go. We have built software to say these are the best locations where the antennas need to be placed. And, we're talking about 200 meters apart. You can have other antennas in there because they are solar systems. So other people may want to buy them, but we only need one antenna, 200 meters, 200 meters, 200 meters. So it's creating a microgrid where we can then manage where the power needs to go. So in a nutshell, that's really how it works. But this is the other, real game changer around this, is that, again, what a lot of people don't realize is if we take renewable energy, a lot of the renewable energy that's being produced are by independent power developers. And what they basically do is they have an agreement. It could be with an industrial customer who says, I'm going to buy 2,000 kilowatt hours per day from you, right? But their systems are oversized in that it can produce more than that. So what they basically do is they have an agreement with the grid, and the grid has an agreement with the power developer to pay them so much for their energy. However, it's a lot less than the retail market price. But right now, they have to sell into the grid. And for most modern solar systems, they also have battery storage because the grid cannot take the excess power that's being produced by the solar system. So, those are some of the key things we can change with our technology. Because in essence, even though we're developing our own solar systems for Nexium, most of the energy that's going to be moved around our grids are going to be third-party suppliers.
So you're talking about like nuclear power plants, solar farms, wind farms, that sort of thing?
Only renewable. Not
only renewable.
Nuclear. No.
Okay, so yeah, solar, wind,
solar,
hydro.
Wind. Or there's other technologies out there, mainly solar and wind. Because the reason they want to come onto our grid is because we can pay them more than what they're getting from the grid providers. And it's more flexible. in terms of industrial customers. I mean, we're working on industrial antennas that can actually move a lot more power than 74 kilowatt hours.
So,
74 kilowatt hours are really for residential.
yeah. So just to break this down further, so you could pay the renewable energy generators, so the solar farms, the wind farms, you can pay them more than what the current sort of, it's governments, right? It's governments that pay these guys. So you can pay them more than what governments pay because there's less infrastructure costs that you have to maintain. And also on the flip side of that, the end user, so the businesses or the households, they would also benefit from lower tariffs because there's no infrastructure. There's reduced infrastructure costs.
There's reduced infrastructure costs, number one. Number two, we're not actually generating the energy. We don't have the capex of a solar system. I mean, to give you an idea on the context of the costs, if you built a 1 megawatt solar system, say in the UK or in Europe, it's probably going to cost you about $650,000 per megawatt. So when you see these systems and they're like 50 megawatt systems, they're costing about $40 million. And if you're only selling into the grid at like 6, 7 cents or 8 cents, you can imagine the amount of energy you need to produce. Obviously, these things are built for 25-year durations, but you have that debt that you're paying over, maybe 20 years. So if we came to a power developer who's got a 50 megawatt system and said, hey, we can give you 12 cents or 13 cents, they're going to be clamoring to our door.
Yeah. Because they can earn so much more. And also the usage of renewables goes up as well, which is amazing. Like that's ultimately where we want to get to.
Yeah, exactly. And, we haven't worked out the price of the pricing of the antenna, but it typically is going to be the same price of a modern solar system because it's going to have the antenna, a battery, and an inverter. But we'll also have antennas that will only transmit and receive, and then we'll have industrial. So the industrial, we're actually, after this meeting, I've got another meeting with one of our ecosystem partners who have these towers, and they're solar, but they also have advertising. They're like 10 meters. They've got 4 advertising panels. They can charge cars and they can charge bikes, all in one piece of infrastructure. But that can be the cornerstone of when Aeir is ready. We just place our antenna within the construct of the building. So there's many ways we can build out this infrastructure. And we are, as you can imagine, we're talking to a lot of different companies, organizations who are very interested in partnering with us.
Before we go on to collaborations and where the business is at right now, because I'm very interested to hear that, got 2 questions I really want to ask you. So firstly, I know people are going to ask this, but is it safe? Like, because you're transmitting some, high energy photons across the country. People are really skeptical about 5G, for instance.
Yeah.
So this is the question I can hear coming up: is this safe?
It is safe. It actually operates under 5G. So if you think that you're using your 5G phone, this operates on a spectrum. So basically, again, it's very similar. I mean, there's similar dimensions with helium, where the helium units ran on certain spectrums where they transmitted data. And our technology is going to be very similar, where it's going to transmit on a spectrum. In different countries, it may be different spectrums, but we've done all the testing around this and the simulations. We've got a 50-page document that states the technology is safe and it operates under 5G. So, we've got all the documentation to say it's safe, don't worry, no birds are getting killed, no one's going to get fried. It's completely safe, because that's one of the things we've had to make sure we documented at a very early stage.
Yeah, for sure. Because I'm sure that, as you scale, that becomes more, an issue of public opinion.
Yeah.
The other question I wanted to ask you, Calvin, was, so where is the state of the technology within the business right now? Like, is it a testing phase? Is it like, have you got like a small pilot agreement? Like, what's the sort of state of the technology? Have you tested this at scale?
Right. So actually, I would say beginning of Q3
this year.
That's where all the testing is going to take place. We're building a prototype. That prototype's probably going to be built between Hong Kong and Cambridge. We do have a relationship with Cambridge Labs. We'll then test the prototype under various conditions. We have contacts all over the world, the Caribbean, Hong Kong, Singapore, even the Nordics. So we can test the technology over various conditions. We would expect to do that, have that completed by the end of Q4. We've already had the technology peer reviewed by two PhD scientists on the mathematics and the algorithms. We're also using quantum computing for our algorithms. I can't say what blockchain right now, but very shortly we will be able to announce the blockchain we'll be using that's helping us with our computing power. And then we'll probably go to Cambridge, showcase the technology, again, get it peer reviewed. Following that, file patents and enter the manufacturing phase. So that's kind of where we're at in terms of the roadmap of the wireless technology. But we're as soon as we've launched Nexium, that's really going to accelerate. But we're putting the pieces in place. Even one of the we talk about partners a little later. I'll give you an idea of the types of companies we're talking to. But well on our way.
But just quickly before we move on to the partners and collaborations, it's currently on paper, theoretical, moving into the testing phase right now. That's the stage that you guys are at. Okay. Yeah. That's really exciting though. That's really exciting. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about collaborations and businesses and partnerships that you guys are working with. So yeah, what's going on there?
Yeah, there is a lot going on, because we're talking to some extremely large organizations around the world, one in Mexico, who have got $16 billion worth of assets in terms of residential, commercial, property portfolios, industrial. Obviously, power is one of their biggest costs. And Himesh, the founder, is talking to them right now about joint collaborations, building power generation for them, with an emphasis on the wireless tech. They've already said, hey, we want this for the whole of Mexico, Latin America. That's how crazy. And they've got the money to do it, We've got collaborations with, for example, a company, they're producing phone cases. It's a company called Click. They've been pretty successful. They've got a phone case that is designed for the iPad, where it's like a QWERTY board. But we're talking to them about actually producing a phone case, so anyone's on our network, when it's built, it will wirelessly charge their phone.
That is very cool. That is very, very cool.
Because you know how it is when you're out and you haven't got your charger and you're like, oh man, I need to get I need to buy a charger. I've only got 20% left. It's a nightmare. And now, all over, not just the EU, but all over the world, especially in the developing world, your phone is like your bank account.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, it's your bank account. You buy your energy off your phone. You do so many transactions off your phone. If your phone's not charged, you can't
operate. You can't live.
You can't operate.
Yeah.
Yeah. We've got collaborations on the power generation side who, for example, we're signing a pipeline in Spain. There's multiple projects across Spain. Once those systems are built, the antenna will just be part of the actual system, you know? And so therefore you're building a infrastructure across one country, because we're talking about 100+ solar systems. And that's 100 antennas. There's so much going on. We've got, as I mentioned, the computing power, relationships. We've got relationships in terms of solar energy, solar transmission, carbon credits. Even yesterday we had a conversation about a panel that is not silicon based, that can be laid flat, ideal for flat roofs, for data centers, to transmission them from fossil fuel to more clean energy. So yeah, these collaborations are far and wide, but they're all part of our ecosystem. Because to give you an idea of our structure, we have Syncneural. Syncneural is the parent company. Nexium, as I mentioned, is our coin focused on power generation. Then we have Aeir on the power transmission. And then we have ecosystem partners who either link into Nexium or link into Aeir. I mean, on the Nexium side, we've got collaborations and partnerships with some really big independent power developers who want us to work with them on the power generation side and then move on to the transmission when Aeir is available. So there are a lot of collaborations going on.
That sounds so exciting. It sounds like, absolutely tremendous. And the phone one for me sounds really, I mean, I know like the impact is far smaller than, say, like households and EV cars and stuff like that. But that is a very cool thing where you're out and you can just charge your phone just by walking around. That just sounds insane, just because the case charges your phone for you.
Exactly.
That is crazy.
And if you talk about EV, just very quickly, and I don't think a lot of people realize this, that because there's big infrastructure issues in terms of EV.
Yeah, that's the biggest problem, I'd say, the EV adoption is the accessibility of EV chargers. And there's actually a lot of DePIN projects that are trying to solve this, because but that's a separate argument in itself.
Yeah, but one of the key issues, if you go to like a charging station, it's a charging station, maybe they've got 20 chargers or 10 chargers. What people don't realize is that each of those chargers is using a lot of energy. And sometimes you go to these charging stations and it says out of order. It's not that it's not working. It just doesn't have the amount of energy to keep the whole system of charging the 10 cars at a time, then another 10 cars and another 10 cars, because the energy capacity is actually being reduced by the grid. The grid is saying, you guys cannot have all this energy, because it's like a balancing act. You take it from A, then B doesn't get what they need. That's the issue. So how we could resolve that, there's two technologies that could resolve that. You have the antenna that actually moves the power to the EV charging station, and then it has its own battery storage. So it can actually store energy and drip feed it into their, into their infrastructure. And, even yesterday we had a meeting with one of our board advisors, and he wants to introduce us to, I'm not going to say who, but they're one of the largest car manufacturers in the world, because they're very big on they don't actually produce diesel vehicles anymore. It's all electric. And the issue they have, especially for some of their larger vehicles, i.e. trucks, is getting the infrastructure in place to charge, large trucks. So it's a really, really big issue. And, it's one that we've obviously investigated. Industrial antennas would be ideal with battery storage. And so we're not saying that they have to come off the grid, but they wouldn't have these issues of half of their, charging units being offline.
Yeah, no, that sounds incredible as well. Calvin, we're getting to the end of the podcast, so I have to wrap it up. And I've been I wanted to talk to you for ages. So it's such a pleasure to finally have you on the podcast. There's one final question I want to ask you before we wrap up, and I like to ask this to all the guests on the We Are DePIN podcast, is what's a use case of DePIN that really excites you outside of your immediate remit?
I think the most interesting DePIN usage that I'm seeing out there is the GPUs, the protocols around sharing GPUs. Because one of the key, anyone who's followed the DePIN space knows that for some of these protocols, I'm not going to name anyone, I'm not criticizing them in any way, but it's a chicken and the egg. What comes first? You've got to build the infrastructure for a lot of these DePINs. Then you've got to find users, and then you've got to find business cases, and you've got to find customers. And that's how you create revenue. However, we know that if you're a DePIN with a coin, if you don't get that right, then you're not actually providing the value for your coin. And then you can get decimated even before you've even got to stage 1 or 2. The thing I like about the GPUs is that firstly, they don't actually own the infrastructure. Secondly, GPU usage the demand is just going up and up and up for AI, especially for AI purposes. They've got a market there. Okay, you got Google and AWS and all these guys. However, if you're able to offer those services at a lower cost than, the big boys out there, you're going to create revenue. And when you're creating revenue, you're providing value for your coin. And I think with the early DePINs, they all had problems around how do you create the revenue that actually gives your coin some stability, And I think, the most exciting area outside of what I'm doing is the GPU space. Because they've got a revenue model.
Yeah.
When you have a revenue model on a DePIN that actually produces revenue, you've gone clear compared to a lot of the DePINs out there.
Yeah.
So it excites me. I've got an idea for myself. I'll share it afterwards. What I'm going to say, this deals with data centers, but not data centers that are built, because, depending on who the podcast goes out to, my idea, someone else may take it and they're gone, So,
that probably will happen.
I think there's definitely an opportunity to decentralize the ownership of data centers, especially if they're green data centers. And that's one of the things we are looking at, is combining solar systems with brand new data centers that use the solar system for their power rather than fossil fuel.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. Calvin, I have to wrap the podcast there, but it's been such a pleasure having you and talking about Aeir and everything that you guys are doing. Very, very excited to finally, see the launch and see the sort of progression. So how can people stay in touch with you and Aeir going forward?
So for Aeir, probably the best thing is going onto our website, and then that can take you into our Twitter and our LinkedIn. And we are creating some other social media channels in the next couple of months. Obviously, a Discord channel, Telegram. So that's probably the easiest way. Go onto our website, and that will take you through to the channels we have right now. We're updating some of our content with some of our collaborations. So this key coming onto Aeir, you're going to see plenty of new content material coming out.
All right, Calvin, thank you so much. It's fantastic. It was lovely meeting you. And I'm sure we'll chat very soon. Thank you so much.
Definitely. Thanks, Yusina, for the opportunity. Talk to you soon.
Thank you for listening to today's discussion, brought to you by Minima, the real-world blockchain. The only Layer 1 blockchain lean and compact enough to run in full on any mobile or IoT device. If you're new to DePIN, subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Twitter to stay up to date. Thank you so much again. We'll catch you in the next episode.